Fluorescent lights above Seaview Diner buzzed like tired insects, staining everything the color of old butter. Grease lived in the cracks of the counter, in the air, in my hair no matter how often I washed it. My sneakers were soft at the edges, worn thin from double shifts, and my feet pulsed with every step. Harbor Point slept outside the fogged windows, but the diner stayed awake, feeding strangers and swallowing my pride. Tonight I was the kind of invisible that had to smile, had to carry plates anyway. My uniform was a faded teal apron over a dress that used to fit before my belly made its own rules. At 7 months, I moved like I was borrowing someone else's spine, one hand braced at my lower back, the other balancing coffee refills I could barely smell anymore. The baby shifted under my ribs, a stubborn little reminder that my body was working harder than my paycheck ever would. I breathed through the ache and kept my face calm. In the mirror by counter, I looked borrowed too. Truckers came in waves, smelling of diesel and rain, sliding into booths without seeing me. They wanted eggs, pie, silence, and they measured my worth in loose bills and whether my smile arrived on time. I counted tips in my head because rent did not wait for kindness. In my apron pocket, I kept Lily's crayon sun, drawn on a napkin, with her crooked letters telling me I was brave. Some nights I believed her for 10 seconds. The other nights, I promised myself I would make breakfast at home. Lily was 6, all knees and questions, the kind of kid who could turn cardboard into a castle. Tonight she was sleeping at Mrs. R. Carver's apartment down the hall from my tiny place, because the sitter I used to afford moved away, and my schedule didn't care. Mrs. Carver left me voice messages full of gentle updates, but I hadn't listened yet. If I heard Lily's sleepy goodnight, I might have folded on the spot, right beside the pie case. So I kept working, saving my tears for an hour. I told myself this was temporary, that once the baby arrived I'd find a day job, something steady, something clean. That lie tasted like burnt coffee. 7 months ago I had also believed in clean. I had believed in a man who looked like he belonged on magazine covers and acted like the world owed him obedience. Cole Mercer had touched my life with velvet hands and iron intentions. Then I walked into a place I wasn't meant to enter, and everything inside me ran, and I never stopped running after. The free clinic had told me my blood pressure was a little high, to rest when I could, to drink water. Rest was a luxury item, right up there with new shoes and fresh produce. I took my vitamins every other day to make the bottle last, and I stretched my grocery money until it felt like a cruel joke. Sometimes, when the diner got quiet, I pressed my palm to my belly and tried to imagine a future that didn't include fear. It was on nights like this one. Mel, my manager, kept barking my name from the kitchen window, like I was a button he could push to make food move faster. I nodded. I smiled. I kept my voice sweet, because sweet paid better than honest. Behind the counter, my reflection looked hollowed out. My hair pulled back too tight, my eyes ringed with shadow. And I was the kind of woman people avoided noticing. It made hiding easier. It also made living feel optional. Until the night past decides you are visible, whether you agree or not. Outside, August humidity clung to the glass, and thunder rolled far off over the harbor cranes. Each time the door opened, a slice of wet air slid in, carrying road grit and cigarette smoke. I told myself not to look up, not to scan faces, not to search for trouble. Trouble found people like me without invitations. The baby kicked hard, as if complaining about my stubbornness. I leaned on the counter for a second, breathing slow, counting heartbeats. Mine, the baby's, Lily's, tangled together like wires behind the jukebox. Near midnight, the diner lull arrived, that thin stretch when even the fryer sounded tired. I wiped counters that would never stay clean and stacked menus with edges curled from too many hands. My back screamed, a sharp line of fire, and I wondered how I was supposed to carry a new life when I could barely carry myself. For a moment, I pictured Lily's morning hair, her cereal bowl, her little arms around my waist. I promised her I would be there. I meant it. Then universe tested me. The bell above the door chimed, bright and wrong in the sleepy room. I kept my eyes on the coffee pot as I moved toward the new table, rehearsing my usual greeting in my head, the way you rehearse a lie you can survive. Halfway there, a scent cut through the diner's grease. Dark cologne, clean leather, something cold beneath it that my body recognized before my mind caught up. My stomach dropped. The baby went still. Without looking, I knew Cole Mercer had walked in, and hiding ended tonight. The bell's bright jingle still hung in the air when I finally lifted my eyes. Cole Mercer stood just inside Seaview Diner, framed by rain-smeared glass and cheap neon, like the room had accidentally invited a predator to breakfast. The yellow lights made everyone else look sickly, but on him they only sharpened his edges. He didn't search the room. He waited, calm and patient, as if he already knew exactly where I was. My throat tightened. My hand slid to my belly before I could stop it, and that simple movement betrayed me like a flare in the dark. Two men entered behind him with the synchronized ease of people who lived by exits. One, broad-shouldered with a close-cropped haircut, paused near the door and let his gaze sweep the booths. The other drifted toward the counter, lean, quiet, and too aware of my hands. They didn't need to threaten anyone. Their bodies said it all. Around them, the late-night regulars lowered their voices without knowing why. Even Mel stopped yelling for a second. I tried to disappear into my apron, to become a smear of teal and fatigue. Cole's eyes found me anyway, as if he owned breath. He wore a charcoal suit without a wrinkle, the kind you see on billboards over highways promising success to people like me. A watch flashed at his wrist, a bright spark in this greasy universe. His hair was darker than I remembered, or maybe I was the one who'd faded. I smelled him from across the floor, clean and sharp, slicing through bacon smoke. My cheeks burned at the state of me. Stained dress, swollen belly, duct-taped shoes. Anger rose, hot and useless, and still my body remembered his arms, and I hated that because it made me feel owned. I forced my feet forward because standing still felt like surrender. I refilled a mug at the closest booth, my hands shaking just enough to slosh coffee onto the saucer. The baby pressed against my ribs, then rolled lower, insistent. I could feel Cole watching me without moving, the way you feel heat from an oven even with the door closed. When I dared a glance, his eyes were not on my face. They were on my stomach, not curious, not confused. Locked, like a judge reading a sentence. In that look was possession, and in me was panic. I tried to pretend nothing mattered, but my fingers were numb from fear. The coffee pot felt suddenly too hot, too slick, too alive in my grip. Someone at table 3 asked for more cream, and in my brain translated it as run. I turned too fast. The pot slipped. It hit the tile and exploded into glass and puddles. The sound was a gunshot in the diner, louder than the jukebox, louder than my own heartbeat. Everyone stared. The only movement was Cole, walking toward me with the patience of inevitability. I stepped back and my shoe crunched on shards. The diner held its breath. Mel appeared in the kitchen window, then went quiet when he noticed Cole. Cole stopped close enough that his cologne overpowered the spilled coffee, but he still didn't touch me. One bodyguard drifted to the door, casual and final. The other shifted his angle so no one could approach without being seen. I covered my belly with both hands, instinctive and humiliating. My skin prickled under the attention of strangers. I hated the tremor in my wrists. Cole's gaze traveled over me like inventory, landing on my swollen stomach and the fear I couldn't hide. He said my name, and I felt the old pull in my chest. The memory of nights when his voice sounded like a promise. Tonight it sounded like a decision made. I wanted to tell him I wasn't his, that love was not a contract, but my mouth turned to dust. The baby kicked like a warning. For a second I imagined asking someone to call the police. Then I pictured explaining who Cole was and what I'd seen 7 months ago. That truth would not rescue me. It would only aim a weapon at my life. Anger burned anyway. Cole's eyes dipped again, and I saw his mind working behind the calm. He wasn't staring like a stranger. He was assessing, fitting pieces together with ruthless precision. His gaze moved from my belly to my face, then to my hands, and counting weeks without speaking. I watched his jaw tighten, a muscle jumping once, and the air around him seemed to sharpen. One bodyguard shifted to cover the door. The other scanned the booths. I stood frozen among broken glass, realizing my secret had a calendar, and Cole Mercer had always been good at math. He didn't need to ask. The realization hit harder than the crash. 7 months was not just time. It was proof. In Cole's world, proof became ownership. The diner felt small. I wanted to lie, to claim the baby belonged to someone else, but the idea died under Cole's stare. His calm made deception feel childish. He had already finished the equation. I watched the answer settle in his eyes, dark and absolute, and I understood my disappearance hadn't ended anything. It had only delayed this moment. Whatever I saw 7 months ago, whatever made me run, was about to be dragged into the light. His eyes didn't leave my belly. The diner's noise came back in muffled pieces, but between us, everything went silent. Cole's expression shifted from surprise to certainty, like a door clicking shut. I felt him finish the math, and I hated that my body had become evidence. I didn't disappear because I stopped loving him. I disappeared because love blinded me, and then it didn't. 7 months ago, I saw what Cole's world demanded, and I understood that if I stayed, Lily would pay for my choices. I could survive being tired and broke. I could not gamble my daughter's safety on a man who solved betrayal with final decisions. That night is still a bruise. I drove to his waterfront building to tell him I was pregnant, rehearsing courage the way you rehearse a lie. Inside, the air smelled like metal and the lights made everything look washed out. I followed voices, stepped into a wide space, and froze. Cole stood there with his sleeves rolled up, calm in a way that turned my blood cold. A man was on the floor. Another man waited nearby like he was listening for orders. No one questioned Cole. No one interrupted him. I didn't see something dramatic. I saw the aftermath in his hands, in his face, in the obedience hanging in the air. My heart slammed, my stomach flipped, and I backed away before he could look up and catch me. I drove home shaking. Lily was asleep with her stuffed rabbit under her chin, her small hand curled like she was holding onto a dream. Standing in her doorway, I felt the worst kind of clarity. Lily's father had already taught me what abandonment looked like. I wasn't about to teach her what danger looked like. So I packed fast and quiet. A backpack, pajamas, her school folder, the crayon sun she taped to our fridge. I grabbed prenatal vitamins and the cash I kept hidden in a jar. Before sunrise, we were gone, and I told myself I'd plan later, once we could breathe. Breathing turned into hiding. We stayed inside Harbor Point, but kept our lives small. I took the night shift at Seaview Diner because it asked fewer questions. I learned to smile on command, to ignore the ache in my back, to count tips like they were oxygen. I kept Lily's life steady on the surface, and I told myself invisibility was a kind of armor. Now invisibility was gone. I stood in broken glass, my uniform smelling like grease, my belly pulled tight under cheap fabric. The regulars pretended not to stare, but their eyes kept sliding toward us. Mel hovered at the kitchen window, uneasy and confused. Cole's men placed themselves without touching anyone, and the room shifted around them as if it had lost ownership of its own doors. Cole looked me over the way he used to when we were happy, except now his gaze landed on what I couldn't hide. Taped shoes, dark circles, the way I protected my belly with one hand. He saw how I shifted my weight to ease pressure in my spine. Something hard crossed his face, a mix of anger and concern that didn't soften him. It sharpened him. I bent down to pick up a larger shard of glass and regretted it immediately. My back flared and my vision swam. The baby pushed low as if he wanted out of this moment. I stayed crouched too long, breathing through dizziness, then stood and found Cole closer. Not touching me. I just filling the space with that calm certainty I remembered from the warehouse. Then the smallest movement confirmed what my instincts already knew. One bodyguard touched his ear, listening. Cole's phone appeared in his hand, his thumb tapping once, decisive. A car was coming. Security was set. My choices were shrinking in real time. Anger rose, hot and helpless. He didn't get to rewrite my life because he'd found me. He didn't get to claim my body because biology tied us together. Part of me wanted to make noise, to force rules back into the room. Then I pictured Lily's face if police lights showed up near our door, and I remembered what attention did to kids. In Cole's world, attention was a weapon, and beneath my anger was a quieter truth I didn't want to admit. I was exhausted. Exhausted from counting dollars, and from pretending I didn't need help, from patching Lily's nightmares with my own empty hands. The most dangerous feeling in my chest was the tiny flicker of relief that, for one night, I might not have to hold everything up by myself. My eyes went to the door. Rain streaked the windows. The parking lot beyond looked empty and far. I could walk out on my own, head high, letting the diner believe this was my choice. Or I could resist and let Cole prove, in front of everyone, that he didn't accept no. I swallowed hard, pressed my palm to my belly, and stepped toward the door anyway. If I was about to be trapped, I would at least choose how I entered the cage. Behind the glass, I saw headlights slide into the lot, dark and patient. My stomach tightened. I told myself to walk, keep my chin up, even while one part of me finally exhaled too. And rain followed me into the black SUV, sealing the diner behind tinted glass like it had been a bad dream. The leather seat accepted my aching body with a softness that felt indecent. Cole sat beside me, close enough that I could feel warmth through my sleeve, yet he kept his hands to himself, as if restraint were another kind of rule. The city slid by in blurred streetlights and wet asphalt. I watched my own reflection float in the window, belly round, eyes tired, and wondered how a life could change in one door chime and still feel unreal. The drive ended under a private garage where the air smelled of concrete and money. A guard nodded without speaking, and the elevator rose so smoothly my stomach lagged behind, the baby shifting as if it disliked heights. When the doors opened, the hallway was silent, on carpet thick enough to swallow footsteps. Artwork hung like expensive secrets. Cole moved with practiced certainty, never glancing back to see if I followed, because he assumed I would. I did, one careful step at a time, holding my back, thinking of Lily sleeping miles away and the promise I had made to her. The penthouse door opened with a soft click, and the space beyond was all glass and controlled light. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed Harbor Point glittering, innocent from this height. The furniture was modern, pale, and untouched by clutter, like nobody was allowed to leave a mess or a feeling behind. I stood in the center, smelling only faint citrus instead of fryer oil, and my throat tightened. I should have felt grateful, but the quiet made me nervous. Silence can be comfort, or it can be surveillance. Here, it felt like both even before I saw the men posted. A woman stepped out from a side hallway, older, steady, hair silver and pinned back. Her eyes found my belly, then my face, with the kind of kindness that does not demand explanations. She guided me toward a couch with pillows that looked too clean to touch, and she brought a tray of soup, bread, and warm tea. I could tell she had done this for other wounded people, the way her hands moved without hesitation. Cole watched from a distance, giving instructions with a low voice I felt more than heard. She called herself Ms. Dolores Reed, quietly tonight. The smell of real food hit me like a wave, and my stomach betrayed every speech I had planned. I tried to eat slowly, to keep dignity, but hunger made my hands shake. Each spoonful tasted like something I had forgotten existed, of vegetables that were not from a can, broth that warmed my chest. Shame came with it, hot and immediate, because being hungry meant I had failed my children. I thought of Lily's lunchbox with the last apple I had saved for her, and my eyes stung. Ms. Dolores did not pity me. She simply refilled the bowl again. After I ate, my body sagged with relief so deep it scared me. Cole moved closer, not tender, not cruel, just certain. He made clear that I was staying here tonight, that a room was prepared, that security would handle anything outside these walls. I heard the message beneath the calm. Leaving was not an option, he recognized. My anger tried to rise, but exhaustion smothered it. I kept thinking of Lily, of how I needed to text Mrs. Carver, of how a mother's first job is safety, and Cole's version of safety came wrapped in locks I did not own. I was halfway through composing a message to Mrs. Carver when the doorbell chimed, melodic and out of place. A man in scrubs arrived carrying a small bag, and behind him came the crisp smell of antiseptic. Cole had called for medical help the same way other people ordered takeout. The man wrapped a cuff around my arm and watched the numbers climb, his expression tightening. He weighed me, asked about swelling, headaches, vision. All of it translated in my head as danger. I wanted to argue, to say I had been fine, but hands were ice and pulse raced. The man's tone turned careful as he explained my blood pressure was elevated and needed monitoring. He added that I was underweight for this point in pregnancy, that my body had been feeding everyone but itself. The words landed like my sentence, harder than Cole's stare at the diner. I pressed my fingers to my temple, remembering headaches I ignored and swelling I blamed on long shifts. I thought of the clinic visits, the reassurance, the way I kept moving because stopping felt impossible. Cole's face tightened, and his certainty turned to fear. Money could not argue with nature tonight. Later, in the room he directed me to, I stared at the bed and felt my pride loosen. I checked my phone, saw Mrs. Carver's message waiting, and sent a quick update with shaking thumbs. I told myself I would leave in the morning, return to my shift, keep my life mine. Then I remembered the elevated blood pressure and the underweight warning, and my confidence cracked. Going back to Greece and ramen could cost this baby. Cole did not need romance to win, and he needed reality. By sunrise, he had scheduled Dr. Ethan Shaw, and I felt it closing. Morning arrived too clean for the night I'd lived. Cole's driver brought the SUV to the private garage, and the city slid past in soft gray rain. I wore borrowed maternity clothes that fit like forgiveness and felt like a brand. My stomach stayed tight, not from the baby, but from the way everyone moved around Cole as if his name was a passcode. We entered a medical tower with marble floors and quiet art, and we were guided past the waiting room without stopping. Privilege has a sound. It is silence that parts for me, and then snaps shut. A nurse led us into a private suite where the lights were warm instead of harsh. Dr. Ethan Shaw arrived with calm eyes and steady hands, the kind of doctor who looked at me first, not at the man beside me. He moved through my chart like it mattered more than reputation, asking about my sleep, my meals, my headaches, my stress. I could feel Cole's impatience behind me, but Dr. Shaw did not hurry. He carried authority like a coat he never had to button. For the first time since the diner, Cole waited and my shoulders finally relaxed. He wrapped the cuff around my arm and watched the numbers with a frown he tried to soften. The reading was still high, not a crisis, but a warning with teeth. He weighed me, measured my belly, and explained that I was carrying more responsibility than calories. Underweight was not a moral failure, he reminded me, but it was a risk. I thought of ramen nights and Lily's lunches, and guilt burned hot. Cole's jaw flexed once, like he wanted to buy time. Dr. Shaw recommended rest, meals, and close monitoring. And he asked me to be honest about fear. The ultrasound room was dim, almost gentle, with a screen angled like a small moon. I lay back on crisp paper, feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with skin. Cold gel spread across my stomach, and I flinched, then laughed at myself because I was trembling anyway. Dr. Shaw's hand guided the probe, and the monitor flickered from darkness into grainy life. Shapes formed, then sharpened. A curved spine, a round head, a tiny hand opening and closing. My breath caught. That was him. That was real. I turned head and saw Cole frozen beside me. Then Dr. Shaw found the heartbeat, and the room filled with a steady, fast rhythm that sounded like determination. My eyes blurred, and I pressed one finger to the screen as if touch could become protection. I had carried this boy through bus rides, on late shifts, and fear so constant it felt normal. Hearing him made all my excuses collapse. Cole leaned closer, not invading, just drawn in. His face lost its polish. He looked young for a second, stunned by something he could not control. His hand hovered near my belly, shaking, and I realized he was terrified too. Dr. Shaw's calm returned like a guardrail. He explained the risks again, the need for rest, the need for better nutrition, the reasons stress could push my body into dangerous territory. Cole tried to take over with plans and resources, but the doctor stopped the momentum without raising his voice. Biology did not negotiate, and money did not command it. Watching Cole absorb that truth was strange satisfaction. He sat back, jaw tight, and for once he listened instead of leading. The room belonged to the heartbeat, not to him. I felt safer for it, even as fear waited outside. When Dr. Shaw shifted the image, he pointed out details I hadn't known to ask for. Lungs moving, limbs stretching, the small curve of a foot. Then he confirmed the sex, and the word boy landed in my chest like a weight and a gift. I pictured Lily holding her brother's hand, teaching him her silly songs, guarding him the way I guarded her. Cole stared at the screen with an expression I had never earned from him, not in parties or penthouses. Pure wonder, the kind that made a dangerous man quiet. I swallowed and let hope in, carefully. The appointment ended with a plan that sounded simple and felt impossible. Dr. Shaw wanted me monitored twice a week, eating real meals, drinking water, staying off my feet, and calling the moment symptoms changed. He also insisted I reduce stress, like stress was a switch I could flip. Cole heard only the parts he could fix. He started listing groceries, vitamins, a nurse, a nursery, everything he could purchase to erase my past months. I felt gratitude and resentment braid together. Care felt good. Control felt dangerous. I wanted my baby safe and my heart unowned all at once. Back in the SUV, Cole held the ultrasound printout like fragile proof. The rain had stopped, and morning light striped the dashboard. I watched his thumb trace our son's head, slow and careful, and it softened something in me despite my better judgment. He was already shifting into action, sending messages, arranging deliveries, rewriting schedules, carving space in his penthouse for a life he'd missed. I should have pushed back, but my body was tired and my baby needed care. The skyline rose ahead. The pace accelerated. I knew part 6 would start with deliveries stacked outside my door again. By the time we got back from Dr. Shaw's office, The ultrasound printout had turned into a passport in Cole's hand. He held it like proof and promise at once. The penthouse had changed while we were gone. A crew had slipped in and out without leaving noise behind, and the spare room beside the master suite now smelled of fresh paint and clean cotton. Soft blue swatches lay on the floor like fallen sky, and a lamp shaped like a tiny moon waited on a dresser. I stood in the doorway with my palm on my belly, trying to decide if the beauty made me feel safer or smaller. Cole moved through the apartment like a man translating emotion into logistics. Phones buzzed. Doors opened and closed too softly. Ms. Dolores brought me a plate of eggs and toast and watched until I took real bites. I told myself I was eating for the baby, but my body soaked up the warmth like it had been starving for months. Within hours, deliveries began stacking in the hall. Boxes of diapers, a crib still wrapped in cardboard, a rocking chair that looked like it belonged in a magazine. A designer walked through with a tablet, pointing at corners and measuring walls, and I felt my chest tighten because nobody asked me what I liked. They asked what would arrive fastest. Cole's men carried things without speaking, setting them down with the same careful precision they used at the door. Even comfort came with muscle. The security changed too. I noticed it in the smallest ways. An extra camera on the balcony, a new code on the elevator, and the way the bodyguards shifted when a car horn sounded on the street below. Cole acted like it was normal, like protection was just another utility bill. I tried to pretend I didn't mind, but I could feel the fortress building around me, brick by invisible brick. The view was still gorgeous, but the glass no longer felt like a window. It felt like a wall. That afternoon, I called Mrs. Carver to check on Lily. Her voice sounded pleased and a little confused, the way it does when someone is trying to be polite about something weird. She mentioned a man had come by to confirm she was the one watching my daughter, and that he'd offered to pay for extra groceries and a new lock for her door. She said a dark SUV had been parked across the street when she walked Lily to the playground. My stomach turned cold. Cole hadn't just found me. He had reached for Lily. I stared at the phone in my hand, heat rushing up my neck. My first instinct was gratitude, because who wouldn't want their child protected? My second instinct was rage, because Lily is not a problem to be managed. She is my daughter. Cole had moved his pieces on the board without telling me, and it felt like being back in that diner, watched and cornered. I could almost hear the word mine in the silence. Not spoken, but assumed. The baby rolled as if he hated my anger. When Cole came in, he read my face immediately. He didn't apologize the way normal people apologize. Instead, he made it clear he thought he was closing doors before threats could walk through them. In his mind, love meant anticipating danger, and danger meant acting first. I tried to hold on to Dr. Shaw's boundary, on the reminder that control has limits, but this wasn't medicine. This was parenting, and I hadn't given him permission. I told him, in the only way I could, that my boundaries mattered. The next day blurred into appointments and deliveries and a schedule pinned to the fridge like a contract. Cole arranged vitamins, meals, and a nurse visit, and he watched me eat like he could will my body into safety. I let it happen because I could feel my pulse in my temples, and I couldn't deny the doctor's warning. Still, I kept thinking about Lily's classroom, about the pickup line, about the fact that my daughter's world now had shadows in it. A nursery can hold stuffed animals. It can't outsmart the people who want leverage. That evening, the atmosphere shifted. Cole's phone rang with calls he took in his office, voice low, words clipped, the air around him changing like weather. The bodyguard stood straighter. Ms. Dolores moved quieter. When Cole finally came back out, he looked composed, but his eyes were harder, scanning the windows before they landed on me. He wasn't asking for my trust. He was informing me that tonight he had a meeting he could not avoid. and that the danger Dr. Shaw couldn't measure was already awake. He introduced his security lead, Grant Hayes, as if the name itself should calm me. Grant was built like a wall and moved like a warning sign. Cole's rule came out steady, not dramatic. If Grant told me to move, I moved. If Grant told me to run, I ran. No questions, no debate, no pride. The point wasn't to scare me for fun. The point was to keep me alive. Cole left without romance, and I watched the door close too softly. I'm praying my body would stay quiet. In the silence, the baby kicked once, and my back answered with unfamiliar ache. After Cole left, the penthouse exhaled in a way that made me feel smaller. The door had closed too softly, like the building didn't want to admit anyone ever left. City lights blinked beyond the windows, and somewhere far below a siren slid past, then vanished. I stood in the nursery doorway and listened to my own breathing, waiting for my heart to slow. It didn't. The baby shifted low, heavy, as if he was trying to climb out of my ribs and into the night. My back answered with a sharp ache that felt new. I tried to obey Dr. Shaw's instructions the way I used to obey stop signs when Lily was in the car. I changed into the soft cotton pajamas Ms. Dolores had set out, drank water, and then lay down on the enormous bed that smelled like laundry instead of diner grease. I told myself to rest, because rest was for Miles now, not for me. But my mind kept pacing. I pictured Lily's backpack by our door, her permission slip signed for tomorrow, the promise I had made to pick her up after school. I pictured her waking and not finding me, and my chest tightened harder than the baby did. The first tightening in my belly felt like a slow fist. Not pain exactly, more like a warning. I shifted onto my side and breathed through it, telling myself it was just my body practicing. The free clinic had called it normal, and I had believed them because I needed to. Minutes later it came again, stronger, and my lower back pulsed as if someone had tightened a belt around my spine. I sat up, palms on my belly, and counting breaths the way I taught Lily to count when she was scared of thunder. My hands were damp. A soft knock sounded at the door. Then Grant Hayes stepped in just enough to see my face. He didn't look surprised. He looked alert, like this was the kind of thing he trained for. His gaze went to my posture, the way I held myself, and I knew he had already decided this wasn't nothing. I tried to brush it off with a weak smile, but another tightening stole the breath right out of me. Grant moved closer without touching, and I felt my world shrink to his calm presence and the baby rolling inside me. He made a call, speaking low and fast, then handed me his phone so I could describe what I felt. Dr. Shaw answered immediately, and even through paraphrased instructions, I could hear the seriousness. Grant gathered a small bag Ms. Dolores had packed earlier, and within minutes the penthouse shifted into procedure. Elevators were cleared. A second car arrived. Shoes and coats appeared like magic. I didn't argue, because fear had finally outrun pride. The ride down to the private garage felt endless. The baby kicked hard, then went still, and my stomach dropped with him. 2 vehicles flanked us as we pulled into the rain-washed streets. Grant sat in the front passenger seat, one hand near his phone. I stared at the ceiling light sliding past the tinted glass and tried not to imagine Cole on a dark street somewhere, thinking he could negotiate his way out of anything. Halfway to the hospital, Grant's phone rang, and his whole posture changed. He listened for a few seconds, then spoke in clipped words that made the driver accelerate. I caught only fragments in his tone, but the meaning landed like ice. Cole's meeting had been a setup, and there had been gunfire. Grant glanced back once to make sure I was still breathing, and that look told me Cole was alive, but the world around him was on fire. Another tightening hit, and I tasted panic. We entered the hospital through a side entrance where a security guard nodded us through like this was routine. The brightness inside was brutal after the dim penthouse, and the smell of antiseptic cut through my senses. Nurses moved quickly, attaching cuffs and sensors, guiding me onto a bed. Dr. Shaw appeared within minutes, face calm but eyes sharp. He checked my blood pressure again, then examined me with gentle efficiency. His summary was careful. I was in early labor, not fully active yet, but my body was starting. On medication could help slow things down, but there were no guarantees. An IV went into my arm, cool fluid sliding under my skin. The monitor beside me beeped steadily, translating miles into sound. I stared at the screen numbers and tried to anchor myself in them. Grant stood near the door, quiet and immovable, like a human lock. Dr. Shaw reminded me to breathe low, to let my shoulders drop, to stop feeding the panic. I wanted Lily. I wanted my own bed. I wanted a life where love didn't come with sirens. Someone told me Cole was on his way, and my stomach tightened for a different reason. I pictured him walking through these doors with the night still on him, carrying whatever his world required. I pressed my hand to my belly and whispered a promise to Miles and to Lily that I would stay awake, stay brave, stay alive. The beeps kept time. The contractions came again. The hallway echoed with footsteps, and I knew the next door opening would change everything, any second. Tonight. The room was too bright for midnight, all white walls and fluorescent glare that made my skin look pale, and my fear look obvious. A monitor beside the bed kept time with Miles. Beep after beep like a metronome I could not escape. The IV tape tugged at my wrist every time I moved. Grant stood at the door, shoulders squared, eyes scanning the hall without ever turning his back on me. Between contractions, time stretched thin. I listened to the elevator chime somewhere far away and wondered which sound would arrive first. A nurse? Bad news? Or Cole tonight? Dr. Shaw had given me medication to calm my uterus, and for a few minutes I believed my body might listen. Then another tightening rolled through, steady and stubborn, and I felt Grant's attention sharpen. He did not speak much, but procedure moved around him like gravity. Nurses checked the straps on the monitors, adjusted the drip, pressed a blood pressure cuff, and wrote numbers without meeting my eyes. I kept thinking about Lily's backpack by our apartment door and the promise of tomorrow morning. Footsteps approached, paused, then approached again. Grant shifted his stance, bracing for impact at once. The door opened hard enough to rattle the frame, and Cole filled the doorway like a storm finally breaking. His white dress shirt was torn at the shoulder, and a dark smear stained the fabric near the buttons, not fresh red but dried and ugly in the hospital light. His hands looked raw, knuckles scraped, fingers flexing as if he had forgotten how to be gentle. Yet his face was not fury. It was fear, naked and unguarded, the kind that made him look human in a way I had never seen. Relief hit me so fast I almost cried. I should have recoiled from the blood, from the story it carried, but my mind narrowed to one fact. He was here, and he was breathing. Cole crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping short of touching me until he saw my shoulders drop. His gaze flicked from my face to the monitor, tracking Miles's heartbeat like it was a code he needed to memorize. He studied the IV line, the cuff, the rising numbers, and his mouth tightened with anger. Grant stayed by the door, a wall between us and the hallway, yet he loosened when Cole arrived alive. Dr. Shaw stepped between us with the same quiet firmness he used in his office, reminding everyone that my stress mattered as much as my contractions. Cole tried to take over, to demand specialists and transfers and fixes, but the doctor cut through the impulse with calm. The message was simple in my head. Cole could not bully my body into obedience. He could be present, or he could step back. Watching that boundary land was strange, like seeing a king told to wait his turn. Cole pulled a chair close and sat, fists unclenching one breath at a time. In the gaps between tightenings, I pieced together what Grant had already warned me. The meeting had been a trap, planned by someone who knew routes and timing. Cole's shirt said the rest without words. People had not walked away. Cole had. His men had. The difference made my stomach twist with guilt and a grim kind of gratitude. I wanted to be horrified by what that meant, but fear swallowed everything else. I did not want Miles to enter the world without a father. I did not want Lily to grow up with another empty chair at the table. The medication should have softened the pattern, but my body kept marching forward. Dr. Shaw checked the monitor, checked me, then looked at Cole with a warning that landed like thunder. I understood it in my bones. The contractions were not fully responding, and I was progressing anyway. 7 months was too early, yet early was no longer a choice. The staff began preparing equipment with efficiency, moving carts and warming blankets, calling for neonatal support just in case. My hands shook as I held the bed rail. Cole reached for my fingers, careful as if he feared breaking me. They raised the side rails and started rolling me through a corridor that smelled of sanitizer and sleep deprivation. Ceiling lights passed overhead in squares, one after another, as if I was being scanned. Cole walked beside the bed, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. He kept his eyes on me, not on the staff, and I could feel him forcing himself into stillness. Grant followed a few steps behind, silent, speaking into his earpiece, building a shield around this moving island of urgency. Another contraction rose, and I breathed through it, thinking of Lily's face and Miles's heartbeat. Outside the delivery room, a team waited in masks, and I caught a glimpse of a warmer unit set up for a premature baby. The sight tightened my throat, then hardened my focus. This was happening, whether I wanted it or not. Cole's hand found mine again, steady now, and I realized we were going to face the birth together, ready or not. Grant's radio murmured behind us, and the outside world kept moving. I stared at the door and wondered what else Cole had carried in with him tonight besides that dark stain, besides fear, besides love for us. They rolled me through the delivery room doors, and the air changed. It was colder, sharper, full of clipped footsteps and soft machine beeps. Dr. Ethan Shaw anchored the chaos with steady hands, positioning monitors, checking my pressure, translating fear into simple instructions I could follow. I stared at the ceiling tiles and breathed like my life depended on it, because it did. Cole stayed at my shoulder, close but not crowding, his palm warm around my fingers, and his torn shirt a dark reminder that outside battles didn't stop this one. I thought of Lily, and I refused to fail. Between waves of tightening, I tried to find a rhythm. Inhale low, exhale long, unclench my jaw. The pain was not a story I wanted to describe. It was a pressure that demanded my full attention and left no room for shame. I pictured Lily's small face the last time I kissed her forehead, and I pictured the grainy ultrasound image of my son, his heart galloping like he was already running toward us. Dr. Shaw's calm voice became a lighthouse. Cole's fear flickered, then steadied into presence. I told myself this birth was not punishment. It was my proof. Every time my body surged, a nurse adjusted a strap or wiped my forehead, quick and gentle. I noticed how Dr. Shaw never spoke to Cole as if he were the decision-maker. He addressed me, waited for my nod, kept the room centered on my breathing and the baby's heartbeat. Cole seemed to understand, finally, that authority here belonged to biology. He didn't bark orders. He watched my face, counted my breaths with me, and pressed his thumb lightly against my knuckles, like he was apologizing without words. The beeps kept time, steady and stubborn. I held on anyway. Then everything narrowed to one final stretch of will. I felt the room lean in, not with panic but with readiness, as if everyone had been rehearsing for this moment. I gripped Cole's hand until my fingers went numb, and I pushed my fear out with my breath. In my head, I spoke to Miles like a prayer, begging him to arrive and stay. Dr. Shaw's eyes stayed steady, and his team moved like a single machine. And then a sound cut through the lights and beeps. A thin, furious cry, unmistakably alive. My future snapped into place around it. I saw him for a heartbeat of time, small and red and moving, before the neonatal team surrounded him with practiced urgency. Their voices were calm, but their hands were quick, lifting him to a warmer, fitting tiny sensors, checking his breathing, measuring what mattered. I tried to sit up, but exhaustion pinned me, and fear returned in a new shape: separation. Cole stood frozen, eyes locked on our son as if staring could keep him safe. Dr. Shaw spoke to me in reassurance I clung to, telling me Miles was stable, just early, and early meant extra help tonight. After they cleaned me up and my shaking slowed, a nurse asked if Cole wanted to hold Miles for a minute. Cole looked startled by the idea, and like he had forgotten he owned hands that could cradle instead of fight. He scrubbed them at the sink until his skin went pink, then sat in a chair as carefully as if he was sitting beside a bomb. When the nurse placed Miles against his chest, Cole's shoulders softened. Tears tracked down his face without sound. He stared at that head and breathed like a man learning faith for the first time. When they let me see him again, I rested my fingertip against his palm, and his fingers curled with surprising strength. I didn't need a fancy name or a family tradition. I needed a name that sounded like distance and survival, like the road I'd walked to keep him alive. Miles. Because he had traveled through my fear, through my hunger, through 7 months of hiding, just to reach this room and make that cry. Cole repeated the name softly to himself, and then I watched the vow settle in his eyes. Not ownership, commitment, protection with humility. For me, too. The NICU became our new address. Each visit started with scrubbing hands, swapping street air for the hush of incubators and steady alarms. Miles lay under a clear hood with wires like threads of light, and every beep made my heart flinch. Nurses explained he was doing well for his age, but he needed time, warmth, and watching. Days blurred into pumping schedules, slow walks down polished halls, and tiny milestones I celebrated like holidays. A stronger breath, a steadier temperature, a monitor removed. Cole came every day, quieter than I'd ever known him, learning to sit in stillness there. 2 days after my shaking slowed, Dr. Shaw cleared me to leave, reminding me that healing mattered if I wanted to keep showing up for Lily and Miles. I packed a bag and stared at the hospital bracelet on my wrist like proof I'd survived something sacred. Cole carried the papers, but his eyes stayed on the NICU doors, refusing to accept we were leaving without our son. When I touched Miles through the incubator porthole, my chest cracked. Walking out felt like carrying an empty arm that still ached. I knew the chapter would start with a nursery waiting. Leaving the hospital without Miles felt like walking out with one arm missing. Cole's driver took us through the private exit, past the smell of antiseptic that had started to feel like my new perfume. In the elevator up to the penthouse, the silence pressed against my ears. My body was sore, my milk hadn't come in right, and then my mind kept replaying the incubator lights. When the doors opened, the apartment looked unchanged, spotless and bright. The nursery door stood ajar, as if it expected us. I held my papers like a map and still could not find home. Inside, everything was ready for a baby who was not there. A crib with perfect white sheets, folded onesies stacked by size, a rocking chair angled toward the window, untouched, waiting for a mother to sit and breathe. The nightlight glowed a soft blue, painting the walls with calm that felt insulting. My knees gave out before I reached the crib. I sank to the rug and covered my face, and the sob that escaped me sounded raw, like it belonged to someone else. Grief finally caught up. I had been strong for Lily, for Miles, and for survival itself. Cole came in behind me and didn't try to fix the scene with money or commands. He sat on the floor, close enough that I could lean into him if I chose, and he simply held my shoulders when I started shaking. His torn shirt was gone. He wore a clean sweater, but I could still feel the night clinging to him. I thought of Lily at Mrs. Carver's, probably asking why I wasn't home yet. I imagined her small hands searching for mine in the dark. 2 children needed me, so I let myself cry until my chest eased. Later, when my breathing slowed, I noticed a folder on the coffee table, thick with notes and dates. Not police reports, not threats, just evidence of searching. Addresses where I had briefly lived. The diner schedule he must have found. A photo of Lily's school sign taken from across the street. I realized he hadn't forgotten me for 7 months. He had been hunting, trying to reach me without spooking me. Ms. Carver's new lock, the grocery gift card she mentioned, the clinic bill someone covered once, all of it was him. I had treated every lifeline like a snare. Seeing that paper trail didn't erase what I'd witnessed, but it cracked my story in half. I had told myself he didn't look because he didn't care. The truth was uglier and softer. He looked, and I hid harder. I was proud of my skills, proud of keeping Lily safe, proud of never asking for help. But pride had also starved me. It had kept me in a room above a laundromat, counting coins for diapers. It had pushed my blood pressure up while I smiled at customers. I didn't regret running. I regretted believing I had to run alone. And that was when I finally told him the truth I'd been dodging since Seaview Diner. I could stay in his orbit, maybe even in his home, but my children would not live inside his darkness. The penthouse had to be a sanctuary, not a headquarters. Violence, threats, and revenge had to stop at the door. No more surprise checks on Lily, no cars watching her school, no men testing Ms. Carver's locks without my consent. If he wanted a family, he needed to practice asking, not taking. I needed honesty about danger, so I could protect Lily with real choices. Cole didn't argue the way I expected. He listened, eyes fixed on the empty crib, as if he understood the price of crossing me now. Grant had told me earlier that the traitor in Cole's circle had been identified. That night, I sensed the problem had been handled in Cole's language, permanently and quietly. No details reached me, only easing insecurity posture and the way Cole's phone stopped ringing with urgency. A part of me felt satisfaction, because that betrayal had threatened Miles. Then I flinched at myself. The world was changing me, and I hated it so quickly. I stayed up after Cole went to his office, sitting in the rocker that had never been used. I imagined Miles in his incubator and Lily in Mrs. Carver's guest bed, both of them sleeping without me. I understood my choice was not between love and freedom anymore. It was between pretending I could do this alone, or accepting help under my rules. Staying would not mean surrender if rules held. So I chose to try, day by day, while Miles fought in the NICU. Tomorrow we would scrub our hands, visit him, and rebuild trust. Could love survive boundaries? Before I finally slept, I sent Mrs. Carver a message asking her to bring Lily to the hospital on the weekend, if Lily felt ready. My hands shook as I typed, because blending my worlds still scared me. But I also knew hiding had never been true safety, only loneliness. Cole did not push me that night. He left a glass of water on my nightstand and paused in the doorway, watching me with tired eyes. I realized I was staying because I chose it, not because I was trapped. The days ahead would be NICU mornings, meals, and proof. By the 3rd morning after I came home, the NICU became our calendar. I woke before sunrise, pumped in silence, and rode back down the private elevator with my hair still damp. At the hospital, I scrubbed my hands until they stung, then slipped into the warm, humming room where Miles slept under clear plastic. I talked to him the way I talked to Lily when she had nightmares, slow and steady, promising that my fear would not be louder than his heartbeat. Each visit healed me a little, even while it hurt, and learned to breathe in that light. Miles surprised everyone with how stubborn he was. One day a nurse removed one line, and the next week another monitor went quiet, leaving more of him visible to me. Dr. Shaw explained it as steady progress, nothing magical, just time and care. Cole showed up every day, never late, never leaving early, his shoulders still tense but his hands gentler each visit. He kept a notebook of feedings and weights like it was a business ledger, except his eyes softened whenever Miles stretched. Watching Cole learn patience made my anger loosen a notch I did not know I had. The weekend Lily visited, and she carried her purple backpack like a shield and clutched a cereal bar in her fist. She stared at the hospital hallway, and then at Cole, reading him the way kids read storms. I expected Cole to push for a hug or a title. Instead, he crouched at a distance, letting her decide the space between them, offering her the small courtesy of waiting. He brought a clean blanket for Miles and handed it to Lily first, as if her approval mattered. When Lily finally stepped closer, my chest unclenched and I felt my family begin. Back at the penthouse, I watched for the old patterns. Cole still took calls behind closed doors, and men still guarded the elevator, but the atmosphere inside our rooms shifted. He washed his hands when he came in, changed clothes, and kept his voice low around Lily's bedtime. If he returned tense, and he paused at the threshold like he was setting something down, then came to the kitchen and asked Ms. Dolores what Lily had eaten, what I needed, what Miles had done that day. I learned to trust routines more than promises, and this routine held when it mattered. 2 weeks later, the NICU nurse called with the sentence I had been living for. Miles was ready. I dressed him in the tiny star pajamas Cole had bought and checked the straps of the car seat until my fingers cramped. Cole drove like the streets were made of glass, stopping too early at every light. Lily sat in the back, whispering lullabies she invented, keeping her backpack on her lap like she was on duty. When we reached the nursery, the nightlight finally had a reason to glow. I stood over crib and listened to silence turn into life. That first night home, I didn't sleep so much as drift between breaths. Miles woke hungry, tiny mouth searching, and my body answered with new aches and new purpose. Cole learned the rhythm fast, warming bottles, timing burps, rocking with a patience that shocked me. Lily padded in at dawn with her favorite cereal bowl and asked to sit beside the bassinet. I let her touch Miles's foot with one finger, then watched her smile like she'd found a secret door. Our sanctuary rule became simple. Fear stayed outside, love stayed in, and I believed we could practice it daily. In the 6 months that followed, our life settled into ordinary miracles. Mornings were school drop-offs and diaper bags. Afternoons were naps stolen between laundry loads. And evenings were Cole coming home with his shoulders heavy and his hands empty. He read Lily stories in a serious voice that made her giggle, and he hummed to Miles while pacing the nursery. I started taking walks again, eating real meals, and answering texts without flinching. I didn't become fearless, but I became steadier, the way a lighthouse stands through weather. Some nights I still shook, yet I stayed, and that counted. Cole kept learning the hardest skill for him: asking. Before changing anything about Lily's school pickup or Miles's doctor schedule, he brought it to me like a question, not a decree. When security needed tightening, he explained why and waited for my consent, even if it frustrated him. We took small trips to the park at quiet hours, Grant watching from a distance, not hovering over us. I noticed Cole's eyes always scanned the edges, but his hands stayed open for our children, palms up, on offering comfort instead of control. That was how trust grew, as bread rising, but real. One evening, after Lily fell asleep and Miles finally stayed down, Cole asked me to meet him in the nursery. The nightlight painted the walls, and the rocker creaked under his weight. He held my hand and placed a small box on my palm, plain and steady, like he'd learned simplicity from survival. Inside was a modest ring, more promise than sparkle. I said yes because he had shown up every day, because he had learned my boundaries, and because our home felt like choice, not capture. We stood over the crib and I felt Miles breathe future into place. Looking back, I don't romanticize the fear or the power that chased me into that diner. I remember the grease under my nails, the hunger, the way I ran for my daughter. I also remember the moment Miles cried and everything rearranged. Home turned out not to be a penthouse, a paycheck, or security at the door. Home was the people who stayed, who listened, who respected the lines that kept us safe. If this story reached you, please like, share, and comment what you would have done in my place. I read responses, and your courage matters to me.